So, last week, there was a lot that came out when we spoke last. We ended off with the disciples returning after Jesus sent them out. And you guys remember that conversation last week when we spoke last about the areas that we covered where obviously the disciples were sent out. John the Baptist was beheaded, the whole story with the death of John the Baptist. I'm just going back. Jesus departs, he sends his disciples out. And prior to that, of course, he sends forth the 12. That's where we actually began. So the reason why I'm doing that, because they're about to go to a miracle that for many years, I didn't really see the great impact. Obviously, that we're going to cover Jesus feeding the 5,000. I really, this last 2 weeks, I did not see how valuable the miracle of feeding the 5,000 was until I started studying it out. I had a brief conversation with Vern last week about it, and it was just overflowing. There's so many things that were blessing me. I could not believe what was there, and all along for over 30 years, I didn't really understand it.
That's probably a whole lot more too.
Oh yeah, I'm just scratching the surface. So the reason I'm bringing that forth is Jesus has been ministering now for a little over a year in Galilee. So he's got a Galilean ministry going on. He's going back and forth doing all these miracles, and people are seeing there's something very special about Jesus. These miracles obviously were of supernatural origin. They didn't belong to man. And of course, the religious people, because they couldn't control him or contain him, said the source of it was demonic and said he did these things by Beelzebub. And from that point forward, his tone and his way of communicating to the people became, well, he'll start speaking to them in parables. And then that's how we jump into Matthew 13. But he would explain those he was training his disciples on the word. And now we came back after Resurrection Sunday, Easter, and we saw how Jesus now sends them out for ministry. And it's kind of interesting, the timing of it, because prior to Easter, or Resurrection Sunday, we were going out trying to evangelize San Carlos, an area here in Fort Myers. The sending out, the timing of it, I found it, I would say Holy Spirit led, because I didn't design it this way because I didn't know what the plans of the church were. This is just how it ended, the timing of all things. So now we're coming back to Jesus saying, I'm going to send you out. And what was his mandate to them? To do basically the same things that I was doing. Go heal the sick, cast out demons, and raise the dead. Now, we don't have an account record of what they did, right? We don't. But this was their command. And as I studied this wasn't like a weekend journey or an afternoon journey. This took weeks or months what they did in Galilee. So Jesus was well known because of what he did by himself. The signs and wonders, the casting out the demons, the raising of the dead had already happened. So he was well known, and the crowds were getting huge, massive, wherever he went. But now he's multiplying himself by 12. We don't know what happened, but we know that the crowd got even bigger, because now when he's about to feed the 5,000 men only, Matthew says, not including women and children. So it could have been his minimum of 10 to 15 to 20 to 25,000 people, depending how many people. This crowd was just getting huge and massive. And think about it. John just got beheaded. He's in if I was to say the jurisdiction of whose authority? Herod. There's other Herods, but he's in Herod, who killed John, had him beheaded. And Herod is looking at Jesus like, is this Jesus? Is this John raised from the dead? So he can pursue him if he wanted to and try to snuff him out, but that never happens and transpires. And we're going to notice in the next couple of sessions that Jesus stays away from Herod's kingdom, so to speak, because he's going to different areas. So he doesn't have to worry about that. And then this miracle we're about to read, and I just said to you earlier that I didn't really understand the significance of it. It was so powerful that it's the only miracle recorded in all four Gospels, aside from the resurrection. Okay? And we're going to look at that today, side by side, all four of them. What I found fascinating was the people now wanted to make him king. Think of this. Their promised Messiah, their anticipation is someone who can overthrow Rome so that they can take back this earthly kingdom and rule and reign, kind of like in the time of David. This is their anticipation of the Messiah. Jesus didn't want nothing to do with that.
But didn't the Jews have a king at that time?
they didn't have, or the only king that they had at that time would be Herod, and he was a fake king. He was actually of the descendant of Esau. So this is Esau ruling over Jacob. Just imagine how the Jews must have felt about that. Positionally, not in a racial sense, just based on the prophecy that the younger will serve the older, and this time it's the opposite in reverse. So I'm just looking at how positionally they're looking at one another. And to discuss, because he didn't really have a kingdom, he just ruled and reigned as the authority was given to him from Rome as a petty king. He didn't really have a king. He had to submit all the Herods to Rome, and they were appointed by Rome, including Herod the Great, their father. So Rome ruled it all. They were just giving authority and ruling and reigning on behalf of Rome over these Israelites. So just something to consider as we kind of like visit that time span, the mindset, this, the atmosphere during its time. And so Jesus sends forth the 12. He departs himself. They eventually come back and they want to give him a report. And that's where we're going to begin. Mark 6:30. Mark 6:30 says this, that the apostles returned to Jesus and they told him all things that they had done and taught. What were they supposed to do? Cast out demons, raise the dead, but also to preach the gospel of the kingdom, he told them. It wasn't just about the works, it was about the word, and then the works accompanied it. And that's the same thing Jesus would do. It was he would sit down and he would teach, and then the miracles would follow after that. It wasn't miracles and then later I'm teaching. Luke says, on their return, the apostles told them all they had done, and he took them and he withdrew to a town called Bethsaida. So we know specifically what happened. So I'm going to bring it up on the map here. This is the Sea of Galilee. Let's take a look over here. This is Bethsaida, where they're going to go. This is Capernaum, where more than likely it took place at. This journey is about 4 miles, but walking around the ground to catch up, the people pursued after Jesus, was about an 8-mile walk. They got there before him. They were also, the disciples, they were weary and tired after what they had done, because we're going to read that in a minute, from all the ministry they'd done. And Jesus said, let's go away to a secluded place. So while on the boat, they probably ate, spoke, expecting to go to this place and just have this debriefing of what just transpired while they were out for several weeks or even months. It doesn't take place. Jesus wants to give them rest, but then he sees the crowd and he has compassion on them. And this is what's going to transpire. If we were to look at the entire map, I were to back it up a little bit, would be way down here is Jerusalem. Way up here, 80 to 90 miles, is where this is all transpiring. Sea of Galilee area. We have Capernaum and Bethsaida to the east. See it? And this is where the feeding of the 5,000 takes place. So from this place to this place, I'm referring to the distance. Okay? So now let's look at the scene. The scene is Jesus is going to feed the 5,000. Now, because there was so much here, I actually had to write it down so I can see it unfold. So as we're looking through this, I'm going to give you the verses so we can see how it unfolded chronologically, but how it all happened across all 4 Gospels. So we can see it unfold before us. The returning of the 12, they come back. Matthew says in chapter 14, verse 13, he says, now when Jesus heard this, he heard about the death of John the Baptist. He withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself, but the crowds, they heard of it, that he had left, and they followed him on foot from all their towns. That's why I said they ran around. It was a 4-mile journey on boat. They beat him 8 miles running because they wanted to get to him. Mark says, and I read verse 30, but I'm going to read verse 30, 31, and 32, says, the apostles returned to Jesus, and he told them all that they had done. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure of rest. Okay? And they went away by boat to a desolate place by themselves. So Jesus said, hey, we got to take some time out after I sent you out. They came back. They were tired. They were hungry. And they had no leisure even to eat. See that? So they were working their tails off for the ministry. Luke 9:10 says, on their return, the apostles told them all that they had done. They were sent out. And he took them and he withdrew to a town called Bethsaida. And again, I showed you on the map where Bethsaida is. Now, John, interesting enough, in verse 1, let's read this. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is called the Sea of Tiberias. So the Romans gave it a name as well, besides the Sea of Galilee. So we know that they traveled from one side to the other. Now, when Jesus heard of this, I just read that to you, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard, they followed him on foot from other towns. And again, 8-mile journey on foot, 4-mile journey on the sea. And they beat him there. Okay, so we're going to go to Luke 9:11. When the crowds learned of it, they followed him and he welcomed them. Jesus welcomed the crowd. Remember, they're tired. They need some rest. They haven't had a chance to eat. But he welcomed them. Do you think he could have been impatient? Man, I need some rest. This crowd's getting too much. And in our humanity, we might say that, might get frustrated. I'd be the first one to say, yeah, I would. I would have.
I'd be first with you.
Okay, you be with me? Okay, we'll hold the hands together. So Jesus welcomed them and he spoke to them about what? Of the kingdom of God. Immediately he spoke to them about the kingdom of God. And then what he did? Then he cured those who had need of healing. One preceded the other. Okay? It was the words before the works. Mark says in verse 33, now many saw them going and they recognized him. How did they recognize him? How did they recognize Jesus? They heard stories about him. They didn't have cameras and videos. People told stories about him. So they knew of him. They knew of his 12. Now many saw them going and they recognized them and they ran on foot from all the other towns and they got there, I told you, ahead of him. So I'm not making this up. This is how it happened. Verse 14 in Matthew says, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. Notice this. He had compassion on them. And then he healed their sick. What did Luke say? He had compassion on them. Then he spoke to them about the kingdom of God. And then he healed their sick and who had need. That's what Luke said. So you see it correlating. The message was more important than the works of Jesus that would come. He knew their need. He had compassion. And what I saw,
They still had to eat.
absolutely. Maybe they ate on the boat. I can say that much. Maybe they ate something on that boat, but maybe not enough, because who would come to him later and say, it's getting late and the crowd is hungry, send them away? Those who are probably still hungry themselves, the apostles. In your humanity, you might still be hungry because this took hours, this 5,000 teaching and preaching and healing, because then the day got later and darker. And then the first to complain is 12. It's 12. You'll notice that. What did John say in verse 3 and 4? He says, Jesus went up on a mountain. So now they're in Bethsaida, Julius. He went up on a mountain there and he sat down with his disciples. Verse 4 says, what time of year was it? Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Interesting enough, this is the second Passover, because the first one was in John 2, where he went there when his ministry started. He turned over the money tables. This is another Passover. And then another Passover to come, the third one would be when he goes to the cross. 3-year ministry, or 3.5-year ministry. So this is around this time of year, March, April. So you have an idea. And scholars have said this is around AD 29. Luke says in 9:12, now the day began to wear away. The day was wasting away. A lot of hours had passed. And the 12 came to him. Who came to him? Those who were probably not fed enough on that little boat trip. The 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away to the surrounding villages and the countryside to find lodging. They needed a place to stay because there was no hotel where they were at. Remember, it's a desolate place. To find lodging and get provisions, for we are in a desolate place. And that's what Jesus said, we were going to a desolate place. Well, when they got there, it wasn't so desolate. There was a crowd, but there was no resources there. There was no stores to go to. There was no shops to eat. There was no place to get food, no fast food joints like we have today. You couldn't go just drive through. Matthew says in verse 15, now when it was evening, as we read earlier, the day wasted away, began to wear away in Luke. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and they said, this is a desolate place and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages, not only for a place to live, buy food, okay? Buy food for themselves. Mark says in verse 36, send them away to the surrounding countrysides and villages and buy for themselves something to eat. Now, I want to point out something that I didn't say yet. When I finish reading Mark 34, When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them. Why? Notice this, because he saw them like a sheep without a shepherd. That stood out to me, because what he's about to do in the Gospel of John, this is the first time he's going to talk about, later on in the chapter, we won't get to it today, that the 7 I ams of Jesus. I am the bread of life. I am the door. He says, I'm also the good shepherd. He doesn't say he's a good shepherd, but here he does what a shepherd does. He has them all sit down and he feeds them. He takes care of them. This is the great shepherd at work. It's interesting enough that what he does, the great shepherd is doing. He saw them as a sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. Again, back to what is he teaching them about the kingdom of God. And then he began to heal. And of course, Mark says, and when the day grew late, the disciples came to him and they said, this is a desolate place and the hour is late. Send them away to go to the surrounding countrysides and villages and buy for themselves something to eat, food and place to stay. I love what Jesus' response is. Watch this. Because in our humanity, let's ask the question, what would you do? Jesus said, they don't need to go away. Obviously, the disciples didn't like that answer. They're probably hungry. The little bit of resources they have, they want to keep to themselves, I suppose, to feed themselves. But Jesus says, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. This is a massive crowd, anywhere between 10 to 25,000 people.
What do they think?
Just do some math with me for a minute. How small are sardines?
Not very big.
Not very big. And we're going to find out that the bread and the fish, the bread is more like the flat bread. It's not like a loaf of bread that we have today. Okay, so it's more like crackers. Okay, it was crackers and small sardines, this pickle fish. Could you imagine how many sardines it would take to make you feel like you gorged yourself in food?
5,000.
Yes, 4,000 or 5,000. Do the math of that. So if these small fish, pickle fish, were given to you, and because the word they used that they were satisfied is the word they were gorged. They were more than full, and then there were food still left over, and they collected 12 basketfuls left over. So he multiplied so many fishes and breads that they were able to collect it all and still have 12 baskets left over. So could you imagine the amount of resources it would take to feed them financially? What kind of paycheck and how much food it would take? I'm thinking like going to an arena and there's a boxing match or what have you, and there's 25,000 people there. How much food needs to be there to feed all those people? How much food? They came with a little boy's lunch. And Jesus created food. We like to say the word, he multiplied it. Yeah, he did. But he created food. Food that never, fish that never swam, and bread that was never in the soil. He was displaying that he was the creator. I missed that for over 30 years. I just looked at it, okay, the food's there, he's just multiplying like a magician, just magically making it appear as he broke it up. He's created this food. This food was never cursed. If he's creating it, it was never cursed. Though he was giving cursed food, what he gave to them was not cursed food. So as I'm pondering this miracle was so great amongst all that it's in all four Gospels. He's being the creator before them. They wanted to make him king for a couple of reasons. One, we get a free lunch. This is like living in a welfare state. They're going to take care of us. He's going to take care of us. And if we make him king, he can overthrow the kingdom of Herod around us, and maybe we can march down and take Jerusalem. John the Baptist was just killed. There are people who are angry about that. And maybe there's a personal vendetta. We need a king so we can get Herod for what he did to John. There's a lot of things that are going on that, not written down, but if you really think about it, these are situations to consider. Yeah. The tone of the environment, the atmosphere during this time. And now I'm going to read John 6:5. Jesus lifted up his eyes and seeing that there was a large crowd coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, so now this is specific, the first one he spoke to. Philip, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread for all these people to eat? And verse 6 says he said this because he knew what he was going to do, but it was just a test. Remember, he just gave them the power to go do all 12 of them, to go do these miracles. They've seen him stop the raging sea. They've seen him do all these things. Yes. And you know what this reminded me of as well? And I think I spoke to Vern about this. When Jesus does this miracle of creating these breads and these fishes, it reminded me of Elijah. Because remember, her vase, the oil, never stopped. So this wasn't like, multiplication. No, it was new creative. Every time they poured it out, there was new oil and they're being created. This thing is only so big. How can that happen? Had to be every time you poured it out because it was God at work. He was pouring out created new oil. And so a lot of people would say that Jesus, was he John? Raised from that, was he Elijah? Elijah did these miracles too. So there is some correlation there. I mean, causation to say, could it be Elijah? Because there's prophecy that Elijah would come. But that was John. It was referring to John, not Jesus. And so Philip, what was his answer? Philip said to him, 200 denarius worth of bread would not be enough to even give everyone a little. And as I thought about this, I said, hang on a second. Why did he say 200 denarii? First of all, what is a denarius? A denarius is 1 day's wage. So this is a little bit over 6 months worth of wages for one person, not multiple persons. So imagine if you save 200 days of wages or whatever your wage is per day, and you have over 25,000 people. Do you think you can get enough food with that money to feed them? So I'm thinking maybe this is the only money they had on them at the time. And as their ministry saving up and where they went, why that specific number? And all four record that number. So I think it's significant. I don't think it's necessarily symbolic. I think he's giving, hey, this is all we got. Can we take care of all of these people with this? Mark 6:37 says, but he answered them, say, you give them something to eat. Now, shall we go buy 200 denarius worth of bread and give it to them? Shall we go with, in other words, you must have this. This must mean you must have it because this is the number they're quoting. Mark 38 says, the next verse says, and then he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. So now it's like, okay, whatever you got, go tell me the resources you got. Kind of like Elijah. What do you have? All I have is this vase with oil. And he told her it'll never stop until the famine is over. So he says, go and find out what you have. And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2, meaning 5 breads and 2 fishes, we find out. John's going to tell us it's a little boy's lunch. It wasn't even theirs. It's still in a little boy's lunch. That's what I see. They hijacked the boy's lunch.
So while you're there, they said 5,000 people, but that doesn't mention the women and the children.
Yes. That's why that number is estimated between, if there were just women alone, you double it. Because these men travel with their wives. You're at 10,000. If they had children, just one child apiece, you're at 15,000. If they had 3 children apiece, that's where your 25,000 is at. And some families vary.
5,000 people, I would include women and children in that 5,000.
Oh, no, we normally would, but the scripture is going to say, oh yeah, watch. Let's look at I want you to see it here. So answer that question. Verse 21 says, this is the answer to your question in Matthew. And those who ate were 5,000 men, besides the women and the children. That's where we get the additional people. We're not trying to add to it to make it seem more than it is. The scriptures give us enough to say there had to be. If we just doubled one child per family and a wife, you had 15 automatic. If you had 2 children, you had 20. If you had 3, 25. This is a massive crowd. And they're not going, me personally, I don't think they're following Jesus for his word. They're following him for his works. They're looking to be healed and delivered. I think that's what the problem is. They were looking more for that than listening to his teaching. There were some who obviously did listen to his teaching. They benefited, and they were disciples, true disciples. But then there were others that after this chapter, his ministry in Galilee collapses. After all he did, it collapses because they wanted to make him king. They wanted a free lunch the next day. We're going to read that next week. And he said no to them, basically. I'm not giving you food. I'm the bread of life. And then he starts talking to them about going to the cross and dying for them. And you have to receive me and eat of me and drink of me in order to have this eternal life, this eternal bread. And then he started quoting Moses. Well, Moses gave us bread. No, my Father gave you bread. And it was this whole dynamic. And then it says that the disciples walked away. Many deserted him. That basically means the same word as they turned away. They became apostates. They walked away from Jesus. They knew the truth. It wasn't difficult. They just couldn't obey that truth because they refused to. This is Jesus from Nazareth. Are you kidding me? He's not God. They rejected him even though they heard the truth. They seen the power on display. They couldn't deny it. No one denies the power. They denied his words. They have a problem with Jesus' words. Even people today in the church that walk away, they don't have a problem with Jesus' miracles. They have a problem with his words. Words like, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? They have a problem with that because he's asking for obedience. And that's a word that means that we have to surrender and say, okay, I'll do what you say, sir. I'll do what you say. You're Lord, I'm your servant. And there is a submissiveness on the part of the person who's following to be a disciple. And that's the challenge that this presents, this entire chapter. We'll be visiting this in more detail in the next week or two. And then in Matthew, verse 17, and they said to him, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. So we already know everyone's consistent. Everyone's consistent. Luke gives us a little bit more detail in verse 13 and 14. And he said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Unless we are to go and buy food for all these people, for there's that number again, about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of 50 each. Now this is that shepherd. Have my sheep sit down. I need to organize them. Because when we start giving them food, I don't need chaos. I need them all to rest. That's what's happening. Everybody rest. He already taught them. He's already doing healing. I need them to rest now because they're hungry and I need to feed them. This is what a shepherd's doing. And he said, bring it here to me. Then he ordered that the crowd sit down on the grass. See, this wasn't a desert. The grass isn't in the desert. This is a desolate place. There was grass in this field. And we learned earlier it was a mountain. Have them sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, he blessed it, he broke it, he broke the loaves, and he gave it to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. Anywhere between the 5 to 25,000. He's breaking. You only have 5. How are you breaking 5 into that many? Because he kept on creating it.
And how did they feed them with only 12 7?
Kept on passing out to these groups so they could pass through the groups and keep passing. And there's only 2 fishes, tiny sardines, he was able to make it last. And these 5 little crackers, and give everyone enough that they were gorged. That's how full they were. So full that probably their stomachs hurt. Luke says in verse 14, there were about 5,000 men. He said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of 50. And they did so, and have them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He said a blessing over them. Then he broke the loaves and he gave it to his disciples, and they set it before the crowd. So what he kept breaking and kept creating, he had enough resources like the oil that Elijah and the widow had. Just kept on pouring. There's more. There's more. There's more. And everyone was more than satisfied. Mark 6:39-41 says, he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in the groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, said a blessing. He broke the loaves. He gave it to the disciples. He set it before the people. He divided the 2 fish among them all. 2 little sardines among that many people. How is it even possible? Creative miracle. God, the creator, he's on full display. This is like the pinnacle of all his miracles he's ever done in public among all these people. Oh, we got to make him king. Could you see the urgency? Free lunch will be taken care of. And also, he could probably take care of Herod. All these things juxtaposed to one another. What does John say in verse 10 and 11? Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now, there was much green grass in that place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to them, to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. That little boy's lunch, as much as they wanted. Wow. Mark 6:42. And they ate and they were satisfied. Touch the word satisfied. Gorged. Abundantly supplied food. So I wasn't making this up. He gave them so much food, they were more than satisfied to the point that they gorged themselves on crackers and sardines. That is amazing. But I saw this as nothing as just eating a meal and keeping it moving. I didn't really see the value for so many years because I was never taught it. But now that I've studied this out, I was amazed that his glory was on full display as the creator. See, he's your provider. He's feeding them. He's providing everything they need right before them. Incarnate here in person. It just boggled my mind that I never saw that and recognized that. I knew it, but didn't put it into words and value what was transpiring there. So they ate and they were satisfied. That's verse 42. Luke says in verse 17, and they all ate and were satisfied. It's the same word. John 6:12 says, and when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples to go gather the leftovers. Remember, there was only 5 crackers and 2 fish. There's leftover evidence. So go gather the leftover fragments that nothing might be lost. So they gathered up 12 baskets with fragments from the 5. That math doesn't even work naturally. 12 baskets from 5 crackers, right? From the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. 12. How many disciples? How many tribes? 12. That's a significant number. His glory was on full display. The Creator is creating food. He's providing for all their needs. He taught them the kingdom. He healed them and provided for all their needs. 3 things are happening all at once. The disciples said, send them away. But even they got full. They ate, and there were 12 baskets left over. Now, sometimes we think these are big baskets. Notice this about the baskets. It's actually a small wicker basket, a traveling basket. It isn't something huge like, say, your laundry basket that you put piled up. It wasn't. It was a small traveling basket. This was proverbially the Jewish traveling basket. He's about to send them off again, and they want to make him king. That's what's about to transpire. So they don't really get their rest yet, right? But so he promised them rest, but he saw the people, and he saw the need of the people, and he had compassion on them. So he wanted to give them the word. So he wanted to give them truth. Truth trumped his rest. I'll sacrifice my rest because these people need a shepherd. And then afterward, he started to heal them. And the day grew so long because so many people, I'll feed them as well. What a shepherd. What a great shepherd. Being on display, shepherding his people. I look at this and I see God's sovereignty on display. That the 5 pieces of crackers and 2 little small fish, when it was all left over, when it was all said and done, Jesus created a creative miracle with the bread and fish. Everyone's fed, and when everything's left over, there is a sign left over that all 12 have something left over for themselves. How can this equal that in the end? God organized everything. Enough people came there to eat, to be satisfied, to hear the word, to be healed. And when it was all said and done, God and his sovereignty and being in control said, I'm going to also leave a sign when it's done. 12 left over.
And 5 and 2, 7.
Yes, there is symbolic to that. Symbolism to the number 7. Yes, there is. But the interesting thing is that 12 baskets would be left over from 5 crackers and 2 fish. He's going to Bethsaida, Julius, just to rest with his disciples and have a debriefing. The crowd is there ahead of him. He has compassion on them. He begins to teach them the words. I think maybe he went and started telling them Beatitudes, how to believe on him, everything about entering the kingdom so they can be saved. And then there were needs, and he started ministering to those people with needs and healing people. And then when the day grew near, they were all tired. Remember, they came tired. They didn't really eat. So that's why I said maybe they ate on the boat. But the first to come and complain were the 12 saying, hey, could you send them away? Maybe their stomachs were grumbling a little bit. They weren't satisfied with whatever they ate on the boat. And then Jesus begins to say, what do you have? Give me your resources. And like Elijah, the oil didn't stop. Jesus started creating bread, started creating fish that never swam. This bread was never in the ground. He created something from cursed stuff. And everyone had enough food given to them that when they were satisfied, the word satisfied, they were gorged. They ate so much, probably their stomachs were hurting. And then Jesus wasn't being a modern day, don't waste food type of person. No, just go collect the food. And when they collected the food, there was a sign there, 12 baskets left over. There was a sign. The Creator, the great shepherd, was shepherding his people right there in front of them. He was on display. And later in that same chapter of John, we'll get to in the next week or two, he starts to tell them he's the great I am. I am the bread of life. They wanted more bread the next day. They left. They went to another place. They all followed him again on foot. And when they get there, they're looking for more bread. They wanted a free lunch. And he said, no, I'm the bread of life. And they started to reject what he's selling them. So he knew their physical need, but he knew that their greater need was their spiritual need. And he was trying to lead them to that. Yes, I know you have physical needs, but there's a greater need for you, and it's your spiritual need. And they reject that. And that's why in John 6, many disciples will walk away and reject him. And they had been following him all along. But I think they were following him all along, not for his words, but for his works, for what he can give them. There's no TV, there's no movie, there's no books to necessarily read, thriller books. He's the thrill, following after the miracles, the signs and the wonders he's performing. There's never been anything like him since, even today. And so when I see this, I am amazed with what I didn't see all these many years in this feeding of the 5,000, that his glory was on display as a man. The Creator was at work creating food, ministering the gospel and healing the sick, being a great shepherd. I never saw it all happening at once. This is the pinnacle of what he did in Galilee. And then after the next day, his whole ministry falls apart because many walk away because they wanted more work. They wanted more works. Feed me, feed me. Nope. I'm not going to feed you. I'm the bread of life. They rejected him. And for over a year, he's done this. And now it's going to be a year that he's going to the cross. And for the next year, all he's going to do is concentrate more on teaching his disciples. He's going to really concentrate on training them. The crowds are going to get smaller, a lot smaller. He'll eventually end up in Judea. The crowds are not as big as the thousands. As a matter of fact, the next feeding of the 4,000, he's not feeding the Jewish people. These are Gentiles. Never heard that one before, right? Wait until we get there. Yeah, he does it in a different land. He's going to the west coast. And on the west coast of the Sea of Galilee, it's going to be to Gentiles. So you imagine this great shepherd is feeding both. He came for the lost sheep of Israel, but now he's feeding both. This is amazing. I never heard that until I started studying it. I always assumed it was to the Jews. Only to the Jews. No, these were Gentile people. I was shocked when I saw it. I said, I never saw that before because I assumed. You know what they say about I assumed? Well, I'm not going to repeat it, but that's what happened. I assumed. And I couldn't believe I made a fool out of myself. Yeah, my wife's even looking at me like she's stunned. Go verify. Verify. So we'll get to that one. Matthew 14:20 says, and they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. Luke 9:17 says, and they all ate and were satisfied, and what was left over and picked up was 12 baskets of the broken pieces. Verse 13 in John says, so they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. Mark 6:43 says, and they took up 12 basketfuls of the broken pieces and the fish. See, the fish were collected as well. We assumed it was only the bread. Mark tells you, and the fish. Matthew 14:21. And those who ate were 5,000 men, besides women and children. That's why I said to you guys earlier, it was not just 5,000. If we just added one child and one spouse, we're at 15,000. If more children, we're getting to even more. So let's finish with the 2 verses that I didn't read in John at the end. Verse 14. And when the people saw the sign, I told you it was a sign, the 12 baskets left over, besides everything he did, the sign that he had done, they said, this indeed is the prophet. This is from Deuteronomy that Moses spoke of the prophet to come. Listen to him. Capital P, the prophet who was to come into the world. And look what Jesus notices, his instinct. Perceiving then that they were about to come and what? Take him by force and make him king, Jesus withdrew again into the mountain by himself. He withdrew. So we're going to stop right there. The next part, when we get into this, this happens and the disciples are there. I want you to see the scene. The disciples are there. But Jesus says, hey, you guys go to the side. I'll dismiss the crowd. So Jesus handles this problem by himself. He dismisses them, and then he goes to the mountain and prays. So there's a lot here, but I couldn't believe that I saw the great shepherd at work, shepherding his people, feeding them, trying to teach them how to come to salvation, and healing them while he was there. His words, his works, but it was the order of his words came first, and then because of his compassion, his works came. And then he provided his provision. So I pray that this chapter makes you reflect, because we're going to come back to this, because we're still going to be dealing with this. We're going to be the next day, next week, regarding this, and how the people are going to start rejecting Jesus, and this ministry begins to collapse. So I pray that you guys learned a lot, and you might want to go visit this for next week, because you're probably going to have a lot more questions.
I was thinking that some of the people were there for themselves to eat and not for the word. And when he specified for the word, they weren't really interested. Of course, they're more interested in eating. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, that would be the next day's event. They're going to come back looking for a free lunch. Absolutely. On this day, no one knew the food was coming. They were there for the miracles. But once they got this provision taken care of, the next day they came looking for him. Remember, they wanted to make him king by force, but they wanted more food, a free lunch. And Jesus goes on to say, I'm not here just for your natural needs, but your spiritual. I am the bread of life. And as that message goes on, we're going to dive into what Jesus says. He's going to get rejected, and people are going to walk away. Disciples, it says disciples of his walk away. It's interesting that they would use that word, and we'll dive more and open that up much more next week.